beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Vanessa Scotto, and I'll be joined soon by my dear friend and co-host, Brooke Thomas. On the show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path. What does that actually mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything? All the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life. Whether you're new to the show or you've been listening for a while, just a note about the frame here. We're not having these conversations as the word. We sure as hell aren't gurus. We're just a couple of regular humans having a talk and sharing our personal experiences as we follow our own paths. In this episode, we're talking about the sneaky need to be liked. Over the years of our self-exploration, it's become super clear just how much of our own desires for approval can drive our choices and cloud out our clarity. Of course, it's pretty human to want to be accepted by others, but what happens when you do it at your own expense? Or when the desire to be likable takes on a full-fledged good girl or good boy identity? Or even worse, when it keeps your past trauma recirculating in a never-ending loop of self-sacrifice or self-flagellation? These questions are just the surface of this conversation. As approval junkies in rehab, we've got lots to share in this episode on the ever-fascinating topic of needing to be liked. If you're enjoying the show, we'd be delighted if you left a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. Please also head over to blissandgrit.com, where you can get resources, you can buy goodies, and you can subscribe to hear updates on upcoming events or just to get our Friday newsletters that we've been sending out. One last thing before we head into the conversation, we do tend to curse. So if you are in mixed, non-swearing company, you may want to wear headphones. Okay, here we go.
Hello, Vanessa.
Hi, darling.
As usual, you and I have zero idea what's going to come out of our mouths, except we had a little brief convo about what's up. So what's up for me, what's most alive right now, is just watching how much the need for approval, the need to be liked, the need to be likable runs my whole life. It's fascinating to watch this layer. And like, I remember reading or hearing Byron Katie at one point talk about how she only has one prayer. Like when she prays, it's only ever one thing, which is something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing, please God, spare me the need for approval.
Ooh, that's a goodie.
Yes. And I think it's something like, spare me and all beings from the need for approval.
Very generous.
And I remember when I first read that probably a decade ago, I remember it striking me as sweet, but also kind of like besides the point. You know, like it was this very small thing to wish for yourself and for humanity, to wish that they wouldn't want approval. I'm like, well, I mean, the need for approval is annoying.
Yeah,
but like,
I thought that, but it's so human.
Right.
And,
like, shouldn't you wish for something more important? Like compassion, 100% of the time, peace, whatever. And then I've just realized more and more and more as things have fallen away that like my need for approval, which I think is woven into all of us, I do think it's just a part of being a human, is the thing that creates all of the problem, and as this path goes along, like I was just re-listening to our talk from last week, that airs as we're recording in real time now, airs tomorrow. And I'm talking about like getting a craniosacral session and having this download, right? This spiritual insight, which happens a lot, right? When you're a meditator or when you're engaged in this path, it happens a fair amount. And I remember as I was saying it to you in our last call, like, don't do it. Don't say it. Don't be the weird one. Don't be wacky. And wanting to talk to you about it now in this way, like the degree of rawness that this has, and just being like, but there's always this little movement of like, but polish it up a little, but be likable. Don't be weird. Don't be, it's amazing, like how much it's like, I'm totally willing to live a life of integrity and clarity and truth and like really moving from love in the world, except at the end of all that, I had better be really likable by everyone. Everyone will be like, wow, she's nice and admirable and I like her. Like, that's not at all what's going to happen. Of course, like that's not what happens.
Well, dude, stop popping my bubble because it's what I want to happen too. I don't even know what to say. Sometimes my head gets so log jammed as I hear myself say on the podcast, I have too much to say. This, I have nothing to say. I'm like, and scene. And the end. That's it. Right. I just want to be likable. Episode complete.
And it sucks. Goodbye. I don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, because it's running my life. I think it was when we had interviewed Kieran, I was talking about how recently I had what I call Fright Week, which is this week where it just felt like fear was oozing out of my pores. And I was dreaming these like fear-based dreams, which I haven't in so long, really. I did have a history of nightmares and such like that. But something nowadays that doesn't seem to be the norm. But all of a sudden this whole week, it was all bad dreams. But the crazy thing is like 2 out of like 3 or 4 of the bad dreams were like high school traumas. Like stupid, people didn't like me, someone was judging me. I can't remember if I said this in a recording or I said it to you last week, but like one of them was I was a model and someone was taking pictures of me at the same time as another girl from high school was like not liking me. So it was all my fears at once, body image fears combined. And what really was funny is, okay, so as I'm going through this Fright Week, I could tell what Kieran had said in the episode I had felt. Regardless, I had felt prior, like, oh, it's a good sign. It's like fear's on the run. Like, really feels like a detox and an emergence in a really good way. And I'm like, this is it? This is the big boogeyman that lives in me?
I know. Is that people won't like me?
Is that I'm unlikable? Maybe even unlovable, heaven forbid. Certainly that I'm a bad person, that I'm a disappointment as a human being. I had one dream one moment where someone was going to break into my house. So that was like the one oogie boogie left. But really, the most of it was just that I'm not likable. And I find over the last few weeks, it's stuck around. I can observe it. It's coming back to play a little bit. And I'm just sort of watching it as it evolves. And I see myself thinking things like, but would a good person do that? Right. So take the simplest example. Let's say someone texts you and you don't want to respond, or, you want to respond in a way that you're not sure that they'll like, they want like a long conversational response and you just really want to send back a word, these kinds of things. I can feel what's natural for me, right? I can feel where I want to go. And then I start thinking, but would only a shitty person do that? And how do I rectify it? And in this whole exploration, I've seen a few things. One, what you're pointing to is my attachment to this good girl identity that's really likable and really virtuous. And then 2, the way that my conditioning around spirituality still shows up as if you're spiritual, you have to be a good person. And then good seems to mean that there's certain tenets of life you follow. Some of them are very easy for me, like don't kill someone and don't cheat on people. I can do these things. I can figure them out. But others are like, do I eat meat or don't I? Do I have to like everyone? What if people want to talk to me? A lot of people want to talk to me about their problems. It's kind of what I do for a living. So I have a knack for listening. Do I have to talk to everyone because they have a need? So starting to look at this good girl identity, this idea that spirituality means you're a quote unquote good person. And what does that actually mean? Because since there's not an agreed upon formula, the only way I can tell if I'm a spiritually good person is if people seem to be happy with me, right? It's all very thick right now for me.
I'm reminded of, I don't know if, I feel like this was in an interview, but maybe it was in a teaching. My memory of it is that I'm hearing Adyashanti say it. So I feel like I heard him say this on a recording, and he was talking about Jesus. And of course he has that book that I love, Resurrecting Jesus. So maybe he was being interviewed about that book when it was released. And he was saying how Jesus, who I think we can all argue pretty strongly is like, you know, a spiritually good person. He's, you know, somebody for a few thousand years who we've held up as like
a figure, an
ideal of what spirituality lived, embodied spirituality looks like in a life. And he was saying that Jesus was one of the first people, or at that time anyway, a rare human who did not have the orientation of, do they like it? Will they like it? They meaning whoever, everyone else in the world. If I say this, you know, if I speak out against corruption in the temple, corruption in the hierarchy of my faith, will they like it? You know, is there some way that I should just sugarcoat it, or like just make friends with the right people and not upset the wrong people, and kind of, you know, maneuver my way in and say it in a way that's kind of appealing and doesn't really ruffle feathers, but can get a little bit of change made, but doesn't rock the boat too much. Like, this was not this person. You know, he didn't give a shit at all about will they like it, you know, and he was crucified for it, which I think is like a part of the deep wiring in all of us to be liked. Even if we're not talking about being killed, we're just talking about how we have historically as humans relied on the support of our culture. You know, back in the day, or even today, if you're still living in a tribe in the Amazon, if you are shunned, you are fucked. Like, that's the same as death. If the community isn't going to help support you, if the community decides, we don't like it, we don't like you, we're turning our back on you, you're screwed. So this is like, I mean, I can laugh at myself and how much at the end, like, yes, I want to be living from truth, but also as long as everyone likes it. But it is really like primal survival wiring. So even though it's funny to see it, it's also makes sense just from a biological wiring perspective of like, wow, it's really been coded as important in all of us to make sure that we maintain at least a certain level of approval, certain level of likability. And of course, when you start deconditioning yourself, when you start watching the way you act in the world based on belief systems that were sort of implanted in you at a very young age from your family and origin, and it was implanted in them from the people who came down the line before them, as you let go of that, and you're not playing your normal role, whether it's in your family of origin or within your friend group or at your job or in your partnership, it's often not experienced as likable because people expect you to just do the dance you've always done. So it's scary to shift any kind of programming away from doing the dance I've always done. You know, and for me, like I'm wanting to do a lot more writing. So like on my personal blog, which isn't a blog, my personal website, which I would like to get the blog going, I have all these articles I want to write that just don't have any home. So I'm like, oh, I can just put them on my personal website page. And all these, I'm writing in my head all the time. It's a great love of mine. I want to do that. And honestly, one of the major reasons why I haven't is like, I go to write it and I'm like, I know what's true. I know what I want to write. I know what I want to say. It writes itself. And I just am like, I don't want to, it's like, I'm not ready to come out of the closet quite. Like, there's a lot of coming out of the closet that we do here. I'm very much myself, but there's this way that if I'm slowing down enough to write and articulate, I really feel this. I for sure know that I have friends who love me dearly and who I love dearly, and they'll be like, wow, Brooke's really gone off the deep ends, potentially. And I'm not talking like wackadoodle stuff. I'm just talking basic spiritual concepts like I am not my thoughts, right? Which we do talk about here. But writing it out in a clear way is like somehow too threatening to my being.
Well, certainly. And then you're taking a stance.
Yeah. And it's written down.
And it's written, and it sounds like you're taking a stand for something as opposed to just two friends chatting. We're just chatting. It's just our personal experiences, which can give us a little cushion. I mean, I've been afraid of coming out of the spiritual closet for years, right? Because you're talking about two different things all at once, at least in for me, what I'm pulling is two different things. So I have my basic human instinct to want to be safe, which means be approved of, right? Be accepted into the group. And I always used to talk about that when people were seeking approval, and then they'd feel bad about it. Like I shouldn't care what other people think. And I'm like, well, of course you do, right? I mean, we're wired to care about what other people think. And sometimes we don't know if we're doing something that's aligned or not until we see the reaction in our ecosystem and we observe how that reaction sits with us, so of course we're looking. And I think about psychology, and I think about how we develop, and we develop through mirroring. And if you're not mirrored by your world, you don't develop normal psychology. Right? So important. It's so foundational. And that is the very fundamental aspect of approval, right? You see me. I exist.
Yeah.
And then you make space for my very existence. And I know that I exist because I see myself being reflected in you and my goodness coming back at me through you. So I get how fundamental it is for us. And that's why judging our desire to be seen, to be heard, to be loved, to be validated is so hurtful, actually, and harmful to our process of healing. But you get to a point, like the point that we're at, where we've had a lot of compassion for that, a lot of mirroring, a lot of being seen, a lot of being heard, a lot of this. And then it just becomes so clear that this track is still tracked, like record track, like this voice is still running the show.
Yeah.
Like calling shots.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's a piece of me that is still going on and on that is quite thick in its belief that I must be or I'm not safe. And it's not safe to express alternative ideas and concerns. And then we have this funny thing. So, okay, to come out of the spiritual closet is something I've been saying a while, because the way I kind of dealt with this in my life is I'm not going to change who I am. I'm going to believe what I believe, and I'm going to think what I think, but I'm just not going to tell you.
Yeah.
And then I don't have to have conflict, but I don't have to surrender myself either, because I grew up in a codependent family. So to me, it was either I am myself, but then there's conflict, or I have to surrender myself. And there was this great thing that I came up with, which was just called hiding. Right? Like keep it close to the chest. And I don't care. I always feel like I don't have to talk about myself with everybody. If people are genuinely curious, then it's a safe space. And then I would share. So I have a lot of beliefs about things that I don't share, especially before Bliss and Grit. And even here, we do share a lot. I think this was a sign of how much our muscles are building around feeling safe doing this. But there's like smaller nuances of the more obscure things, the things that could sound weirder, that we'll just keep to ourselves unless someone asks us, or unless you say something to provoke me, like something arises. So then there's this level of like, can I come out of the closet on the spiritual level? And you pointed to Jesus, and even Adyashanti was talking about that in his talk. Like, we're not going to be crucified today. It's safe to be yourself. It's safe to believe what you believe and to talk about them, not to try to convert people, not to manipulate others, not to do all that shit, but just to express what's true to you, Thank God it's safer than that. But this particular fear of coming out of the closet and being who you are in spiritual topics, just in general, just on what you believe that's very precious and very like close to your heart. I mean, I can't tell you how many clients I've worked with that deal with the very same thing. It's got to be so encoded.
And I think also just because there's a way that I feel like people can talk about this or can hear the conversation we're having as like it's content that I either do or don't want to hand over. And that's a part of it. For sure. But part of it is also just like when you change, like I've changed a lot in the last 2 years. And so some of what that looks like is when I'm with some of my longer term friends, I start getting this question a lot. Are you okay? And they are always asking that question when nothing's happening. So it's when we're in the kitchen prepping vegetables and I just seem quiet to them. Or we're walking in the woods, or we're going to the ice cream shop. So they're never asking that question when I'm nervous, agitated, crying, angry, spewing thoughts. It's always in a quiet moment. And there's something catches their attention and they look at me and they're like, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, and it's like, what is my response? Cause it's like, I'm just chopping vegetables. But I think what they're noticing is that I didn't ever used to be just chopping vegetables. Like I'm a busy person. Like busy is one of my drugs of choice, and busy not just in physical activities of my life and like overworking, over-exercising, that kind of thing, but also just mentally busy. Like I'm always hatching some ideas or fantasizing, right? Like if I'm chopping vegetables with a girlfriend, typically there will be some fantasy vacation we're planning for 4 years from now in the DR or whatever. You know, it's like there's always something. Like I'm one of those people historically. I've always got stuff that's like I'm talking about, or this happened, or I'm thinking about this, or this is what's up, or these are my business ideas. Like that's been a part of my personality for a long time. And that's a lot of what's fallen away. Just because why would I plan anything in a certain way? Which doesn't mean that I don't, but it just doesn't have that same quality of like needing to grab at something or make things happen, or that it's tied into my worth or my value. Like a lot of that's gone away. And so what that looks like in practice is that I'm just kind of quieter. And like when I'm chopping vegetables, I'm chopping vegetables. Or a lot of what I'll say to my friends and loved ones is like, in reality, a lot of what it means is that I've just gotten more boring. And that's just really quite true. I'm just more boring. I'm still funny and interesting and all those things. And I still have things I enjoy, which are the same things I used to enjoy, like being out in nature and wherever. But in many ways, I'm just more boring.
I don't think you're more boring. You might be more boring to people who are looking for something else out of you, because I just had a delightful weekend with you where I wasn't bored for a second.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it's more like, what is the layer of relating that we've been at, right? Because it's like you and I relate on this layer. But if the layer is like, what's Brooke cooking up this time?
Right.
And then Brooke's not cooking up anything anymore, then it's like, are you okay?
Right. You're not doing the thing.
Right.
You're not doing the thing that you do. Right. Yeah. And then something that they've come to appreciate, or maybe that they were even attracted to you for.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden it falls away. So in that relative reality, it may feel that way, but in reality, you're ever the delight, always have been, stays the same. Like,
thank you.
Yes.
I'll take it.
You're light.
Yay,
I really
approval.
like Some of this has to be, I don't know, try this on for size. I'm thinking some of this has to be a worth issue on some level.
Oh
right?
my
if we
God.
get like nitty gritty level, right?
Yeah.
Because, okay, so what am I afraid of? All right, here you and I are practicing what? What are we practicing? We're on these embodied spiritual paths, okay?
We're trying to relate to reality unfiltered.
Trying to relate to reality and truth. We have a teacher like Kieran, and Kieran is not dogmatic really at all, other than on relating to reality and truth. Adyashanti seemed quite the same, though I know him a lot less well as a teacher than I do Kieran. So all of a sudden, she's giving us permission to not have to follow a bunch of dogma. Because if you're if you're studying Christianity, or Judeo-Christian traditions, you have the 10 Commandments. If you study Buddhism, there are precepts for how you're supposed to live. If you study yoga, there's rules for how you're supposed to live. I mean, really in every tradition, I'm imagining at least those 3 big ones that I'm more aware of, there are rules for how one lives and one behaves. And that's what makes you a good person.
Yeah.
Right? That's how you're on the path. So all of a sudden we start working with these teachers that are actually scratching a lot of dogma and saying,
completely scratching it. Yeah.
Stay right in the moment and feel what's right by listening. Mm-hmm. Like feel where the movement is moving, right? And let it unfold and trust life and trust yourself. And like, we're hearing that. So now we start to get into what it really means to trust your life, where you're like, okay, if I don't have a script for how I live, so let's take this idea and a friend calls me and I don't want to call them back. Something very simple. Or someone wants to go out for tea with you and talk about everything that's going on in their life and you don't want to. Now, if I could follow a prescription, I would say, well, you always have to be there for your neighbor. So to be a good spiritual person, I should go. And there's a relief in that prescription because, I get to be a good spiritual person. I do the thing. But in reality, what you and I have noticed, which is why we've let go of a lot of these precepts, is that then I go and I do the thing and I meet with the person and then I feel shitty and I'm kind of pissed at them and I'm really exhausted and then I take it out on my husband. And so that going against the grain because of some idea or some set of regulations, that doesn't work. So we're on to what's the next thing. So the next thing is, okay, well, how can I feel into what's true for me? How can I live from a place like that? And then trust that if I do that, it's all okay. But what we have to trust is that somewhere inside of us, there is this essentially right being, like that I'm not going to ruin the world or fuck things up or destroy people in my path or garner more enemies than I can count and get crucified, right? Like we have to sort of let go of the reins because those regulations, while they're beautiful and it's good they're there, but once you start to get to a certain place in your on your path to truth, you start to let them go because you realize that it has to come from a lived experience. But to let go of those ego reins that we have on our personality and on what's right and wrong, we have to trust that something is going to unfold that has a rightness to it, which is, in essence, like we have to trust that we're worthy of trusting. Does that make sense?
And that there's basic goodness, right? Because I think when a lot of people
think of the words.
No, you did great. I mean, come on. But what I imagine, what I know the mind likes to do is it says, okay, I'm going to let go of my need for approval and my need to be liked.
I'm going to be a shitty truth teller.
And I think what we picture is like some fuckwad like Trump, right? Who's just, now Trump is actually, and I'm not going to waste a lot of my breath on that disgusting excuse of a human being, but he's an example of somebody who desperately needs approval, right? We know this. But it's just that he has codified what is approval worthy, which is tough, full of bluster, doesn't take any prisoners, like that kind of thing, right? That equals approval. And so he needs to be seen as that identity, that kind of person. So it's not that he's letting go of the need for approval and so he's an asshole. It's that he's an asshole because he needs to be approved of based on these terms that his ego crafted, without his conscious awareness of that, obviously, just like all of us. So we have to trust that the need for approval isn't the thing that's holding together our ability to show up in the world as decent human beings. And I find that the most fascinating part of this whole thing is that what we uncover is there's some, in innocence, erroneous belief that underneath the conditioning that says I had better be liked and approved of is just an asshole. But that's not the case at all. Like it's so funny that we think that that's when we let go of the reins, what we're going to discover is that we are now with an acid tongue, pointing out all of our friends' flaws, or that, if somebody invites us to a party and we don't want to go, we're like, I don't need to go to a fucking party. That's not the case at all. It's this very, very soft movement because there's this basic goodness, and basic goodness is basic love. Like there's love for everyone, including yourself. There's just not this need to put on a show of the likable person. That doesn't mean the exact opposite extreme of putting people in your crosshairs.
It's the same thing people worry about. Like if they stop criticizing themselves, then they're going to be lazy and never get another thing accomplished.
Right. The mind's always telling us, well, if it's not that thing, it's going to be the exact opposite extreme and it's going to get ugly. And it's like, no, actually what we discover is the whole big, wide, giant middle space.
Well, what's funny is, okay, so I'm at the point where I can trust I'm not going to be an asshole if I'm just myself, because I've evolved to see myself through many different occasions now. And I can see that. And yet letting go of the idea that other people are unhappy with me is a problem.
Yeah,
letting
that's
go
the
of
hardest
that
one for me. Yeah.
Is so hard because so much of my safety and wiring was just keep everybody as happy around you as possible. And like, there was too much suffering in the world, too much suffering in my family. Like, you can see what's going on. You know what they need to make them happy. Like, just why wouldn't you do that? Be generous, be compassionate, do that. So it's like, now I recognize, okay, if I don't want to go out with someone for tea, I get I'm not an asshole or a bad person. I get to be human and have my needs and preferences. But that moment where I have to confront that someone may be disappointed or have their feelings hurt or not be happy, or think I'm a bad friend, or in the case of my family, like, if I don't go home for a holiday with my family, then I am to them, because of the way that their psychological defense mechanisms work, for a moment, if not a day or more, a bad daughter.
Yeah. Right.
Selfish. My parents loved to use that word with me, selfish. And, it's taken a lifetime, especially when those types of words come at you from your primary caregivers, to discern, well, how would I know if I was selfish? If I was selfish, I wouldn't see if I was selfish because I'd be too selfish to see I'm selfish. So then the information I'm looking for to discern if I'm selfish is I'm looking in my environment, right? Do other people think I'm selfish? Mm-hmm. Right? Because I wouldn't see this major character flaw. But what you don't realize is you'd never be thinking about it if you were selfish.
Right.
Because that's
you'd just be like, more for me. I do what I want. I get what I want.
Right. La, 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 la. Like, why you're big crying babies. Why are you complaining? You just wouldn't have the same thought process at all. But it creates this kind of feedback loop. When you've had that level of experience or trauma with people early in your life where you really were punished or judged or yelled at or name called or hit or whatever, because you didn't make them happy. I mean, I think a lot of us have dealt with that.
Yeah. And I think that, I shouldn't say this because I actually don't know. Like I only get to be a female this go around, but I think that women are definitely strongly conditioned to the good girl identity, right? Like men get it from a different way in our culture where it's like from what I can glimpse, they're not allowed to be human either, right? Like they have to play, it's just they have to play a different role where they're not allowed to exist. And for women, the not allowed to exist looks a lot like, be likable, be polite, don't ever disappoint anyone. I remember, you watched Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt, right? Comedy show for those of you listening. Vanessa and I love the dark comedies. But it was in the beginning when they were on the Today Show. In the show, they were mole women. They were kept in a bunker by a sadist. So, good comedy show. And one of them was talking about how she got kidnapped. keep in mind, this is a comedy show. And she's like, well, he said he had a bunch of baby bunny rabbits in his car that I should come and see. And I didn't want to be rude. So, and then Matt Lauer, who's interviewing them, he was like, I'm always amazed by what women are willing to do in order to not appear to be rude. And I just fell over laughing because it's like, we're so conditioned. God forbid anything but being perceived of as rude. And that is like so beaten into us in such a, and I think men get that conditioning for sure, but I think they get more of a, weak, never be perceived as weak, God forbid. And for us, it's rude. And I've long thought that like women would benefit from just letting themselves be. I know for me in my life, it's been really beneficial to let myself be disliked by all the right people.
Yeah. Well, it would help if women friends were nicer about these things. But I think because it's been so enculturated and because some of us have gone through so many things, you'll get smacked down sometimes in your life if you have women friends who think you're being rude or they'll talk about you or they'll gossip about you. I mean,
yeah, women self-police in the ugliest ways.
The crowd can be thick on that, Yeah. And there's so many of us trying to break free of it. But certainly, it's like my biggest forms of trauma came from my family because we were very enmeshed. And like I said, I mean, if I had a normal feeling, I was pretty selfish or wasn't allowed to be that angry with them. So that makes perfect sense. And then high school, and then being in groups of women, only that same trauma got repeated in grad school twice.
Yeah, right.
So it wasn't just that we were adolescents, and there was something so difficult about having a group of people turn on you. And it's not a totally unfamiliar story because a lot of friends, if I share this, will have had a sort of similar experience. Everyone's might be a little different, where there was some number of people who've turned on you. Mm-hmm. And I think about these levels of group attack, if anyone's been exposed to group attack. And group attack is super painful and super scary. And when you talk about coming out of the closet, and espousing your views, and even us being on the show, sometimes we do get people who have criticism that can be hurty for us. It's one thing when it's like you imagine one friend won't like it, but to imagine like a group of people could seize this cause against you. I don't know. Group attack, I think, is a really potent trauma that many of us have been through. And I think, it's all well and good to say to ourselves, like, it's okay if people don't like us and you have to just be honest and follow what's true for you because that's where life is and the other is death. And that's great. But we always have to deal with the aftermath when someone is legitimately not happy with us.
Yeah. And they're going to just legitimately feel that way. And we're going to feel their disappointment and their hurt. It's not the most comfortable.
And maybe their anger, if you, I don't know, like, oh God, the times I didn't go home for Christmas. I mean, what my parents put me through over like the level of anger that they had. And so the level of conflict I had to navigate. And as someone who's conflict avoidant, and can't stand the sound of raised voices because it pierces through my skin so much, you almost just want to do anything to avoid that moment.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of revelation on what the other choice is costing you. So in other words, at first, what's really, really clear to us is if someone doesn't like me, or if this person's disappointed, or if I hurt these people's feelings, we can see very clearly what the fallout is. I'll get a troll on my Facebook page. I'll get a scathing email. My parents will yell at me. My boyfriend will be mad. We know what that is. And many of us will be conflict avoidant. Not all. Some people will charge into it because they've learned to rebel against that experience. But so then for me to short circuit this whole cycle, I had to recognize how much the other mode of navigating was costing me.
Totally.
That when I try to have everybody like me, I'm exhausted. When I try to have everybody like me, somehow I always fuck up and do something worse because I'm tired and I'm overwhelmed. And now I'm projecting on people that they need something from me that they may or may not even need. And I'm already like distancing myself. And, it gets more and more mucky, and it's not life, right? And it is conditioning. And now, because I want to see truth, I have to look at it more than anything, because it's like truth is glaring it right in my face. So there's no other way around it. But I think, we can't underestimate how gnarled this little knot can be of the need to not upset or hurt or freak anyone out or be seen as weird or disappoint or anger anyone around us.
Yeah. And it costs us, as you pointed out, like our fatigue. And we're harming ourselves by going along with something that we know isn't what we want to do. And it costs the others too, like in your example of not wanting to go to tea with a friend, but then you go and then you spend that time feeling resentful. We do a lot of pretending culturally that we don't know what's going on with other people, but we all do know. And then we all just have different levels of numbing to that. But most people are pretty aware. Like if they're sitting across someone drinking tea and that person is like exhausted by them, they might not pick up on it in the cues of the conversation if that person is like particularly adept at seeming interested in the conversation. But they'll leave and something will just feel off. Like these things do leave their imprints, It's actually, speaking of like group attack, I live in a neighborhood with a group of people who all grew up together, went to college together, were in the same fraternities and sororities, married each other, moved back here, and are raising their kids together. So it's like, to say that it's cliquish is an understatement. And they're lovely human beings who I have nothing in common with. They're hard partiers, and I'm the exact opposite of a hard partier. And their kids are the same age as my son, but I don't hang out with them. We have nothing in common. For me to hang out with them would be the height of pretending to me and the height of pretending to them. And it's like, I just ran into one of the moms at Target doing back to school shopping, and we're doing the thing, right? Where we're like, hi, oh my God, how was your summer? I haven't seen you at the beach. I know, we've been so busy. And it's so funny because it's like, I couldn't do the height of pretending I've normally done. And I'm like, she is aware that I just feel and know that I have nothing in common with this group. And I feel self-conscious because I avoid the hell out of them. And I am aware that she's seeing me and she's like, that she's too good for us, Brooke. That sober person who lives down the street and is judgy and doesn't hang out with us. And it's like, we're having this dialogue under the dialogue, and we both know we're having it, but we're both doing the pretend on top. But it leaves these traces, and it's not easy to be honest all the time. And it's not even necessarily advisable. Like, what am I going to do? Charge in and be like, I know you're judging me right now. Like, no, that's not what I'm trying to indicate. But what I could do is look for like, what's actually true here? And like, what's actually true in that scenario was I do have affection for this woman. I do. Like, I do. I find her charming. I think she's quite sweet, this particular woman. We just don't have anything in common. So it's like, I can connect to her and talk to her instead of the like, make excuses thing. I meant to see you guys at the beach, but we just didn't get there. But I can relate to her in a genuine way from what's genuine, which is like, I actually find her to be quite lovely, even though we don't have anything in common and we don't hang out. So you do have to sort of look sometimes for what's true, because these things leave traces in all of us. They don't feel good. They don't feel good to the us, and they don't feel good to the them. So there are benefits.
You know what I realized? So, generally speaking, I agree with this, and I've said it before, but in this particular topic matter, perhaps revealing my issues run real deep with this topic matter. One of the things I've noticed is that sometimes people don't seem to care. Like, you have that person that you're around and maybe they're draining you and they're kind of putting you in the role of therapist or something.
Yes.
And then like all visible signs would say you're not
yes, there are those people
enjoying
for sure.
that, and yet they want it again.
Yeah.
And they want it again. And I think it might be linking back to what Kieran had said a couple of weeks ago, that maybe in concept, it feels good to them.
Yes.
So they're clinging to that.
I'm
like,
having a great conversation with Vanessa. That's what's happening right now. Right.
Yeah. And I wanted to be listened to all day. No one else has listened to me. So in concept, it feels good. And perhaps if they were really to slow down and be present, they would say, this doesn't feel so good. She looks like she's getting sick. I mean, I had one friend that I used to I noticed as I spent time with them, like, my hands would go under my chin, like, because my head was starting to get heavy. And then over time, I swear there have been moments where, like, my head was laying on my arm.
And they're just still hard charging through the conversation.
And they're just chatting, and so perhaps if they were to really slow down, they would feel into that. But, certainly my parents have never once stopped and been like, nope. Vanessa doesn't really want to be here this Sunday at my pool club, so it doesn't feel nice to me. They're like, this is going to feel nice because family has to be together on a Sunday. And they're like clinging to that concept is so intense.
Yeah, it feeds their concept. And they like their concept.
And they're attached to their concept. Now, this is not to say you can't get free of this, because my relationship with my parents is far superior to anything that has ever been in my life. Like, we have so much more loving kindness and respect for each other and compassion. And my parents make so much more space for me to exist than they ever have. And yet they still cling to this concept. And one of the things that has helped a little for me, I had mentioned this a bit back. I was having a session with Kieran, and we were talking about some relationship in my life. And she was saying, you're letting their pain bodies call the shots.
Mm-hmm.
And so when someone else is insane, you have to be the one to act from sanity.
Yeah.
Like, don't let insanity call the shots. And that just sort of clicked with me. A lot of times if someone's clinging to their concept, not reality. So reality is Brooke and I are sitting. Brooke and I can talk for hours upon hours about our life issues and all of our problems. And I do not put my head down on the table. That's reality, right? I'm engaged and it's wonderful. But if we're acting from concepts where something's actually not working for us for some reason, whatever it is, maybe it triggers your pain body. Maybe their chemistry is not right for your chemistry, whatever the case may be. If someone's acting from reality, I forgot what I was going to say.
Brain farts at the end. It all happens.
Oh my God. And this was going to be the pull it together point that was going to make it all good.
It was going to make it super amazing.
That's what I'm trying to talk about. If in reality it doesn't feel good and you're doing it anyway, then you're letting pain bodies call the shots.
Right. And then life gets more clusterfucky. And by nature of letting pain bodies call the shots for politeness, for the need for approval. Nothing. Right. Exactly.
Changed nothing. You have not changed their lives because that pain body is just getting fed and it stays very active.
Yeah.
It has no chance to be explored. Your pain body that says you have to act in accord to make someone happy and like blah, 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 blah is active and being fed. And so everyone's just spinning out in some insane circle, living from their pain bodies.
Yeah.
And so net, I haven't done anything good.
Right. Exactly.
Right? So if net, my desire is to make a positive difference in this world. Okay, well, I can go to that meeting where I'm going to have my head on the table because I'm so exhausted for some reason for listening to this person. But then when I go home and I try to work on Bliss and Grit or I work with my clients, I'm tired and I can't show up for my husband, right? So net, did I do something good? Or if I actually follow my alignment, say, you know what I really need is to stay home, maybe, I don't know, take a bath, do a little meditation, do a little stretching, whatever the case may be, but not do this. And then I show up for my clients really well. And then they show up for people in their lives really well. And then I have a really good episode and my brain works and I don't forget what I'm saying in the middle of it. And all these things happen. Then net, there's a more positive outcome.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Geez, that took me like 10 minutes to get to that.
No, it was so good because I was going to say something at the end too. I had this whole thing and now for some reason we're getting the clear message of like, call it a day, ladies.
Thanks for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. Just go over to the website and scroll down, and you'll see each episode's separate post, and we put the resources right in there. Coming soon, we'll be putting links to some of the books we mentioned or some of the programs, so you can buy it very easily right through the website. You can also come join the conversation on Instagram and Facebook. It's getting lively over there. We so love being in community with you guys. We're Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. If you want to support the show, we have a couple of different ways. We are now selling some beautiful merchandise. So you can check that out on the website, see if anything is floating your boat. Or you can write us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our Facebook page, which again is Bliss and Grit. If technology isn't your thing, well, you could do it the good old-fashioned way and just tell some friends you think it might resonate with. It's so appreciated by us. Huge gratitude to all of you who've written reviews already. And I just want to share one from Carla Harless, who said, "My favoritist to listen to, always good for a laugh, a hell yeah, and a reality check, and a deeper perspective. Grateful to hear voices like mine that get all the feels. Now every time I drive through Grit, Texas, I think of y'all and know that bliss is just around the corner. Most times." I love that, Carla. You're really speaking our language. Thanks so much for that. Thanks to all of you who've taken the moment to left reviews and who are talking to us on social media. We love being in community with you, and we'll be back next week.